"Step out of the vehicle." The words weren't a request, they were a command, delivered with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been told no. He had no idea he was speaking to an ambassador, a man who could dismantle his career with a single phone call. This was his first and most critical mistake. The California sun beat down on the Pacific Coast Highway, turning the asphalt into a shimmering black ribbon. Ambassador Kalen Adebayo drove his unmarked diplomatic vehicle, a sleek black sedan with the windows down, letting the salt-tinged air fill the car. He was on his way back from a quiet, unofficial meeting in Monterey, a brief respite from the gilded cage of the embassy in San Francisco. The rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs was a soothing counterpoint to the hum of the engine. For a few precious hours, he wasn't His Excellency, the diplomatic envoy of a key West African nation. He was just Kalen, a man enjoying a rare moment of anonymity. That anonymity was shattered by the piercing wail of a siren. Kalen glanced in his rearview mirror. A motorcycle cop, a silhouette of authority against the blinding sun, was closing in fast. Kalen's brow furrowed. He was a meticulous driver, a habit ingrained from years of navigating chaotic city streets and high-security motorcades. He checked his speedometer, exactly the speed limit. He signaled, pulled the car smoothly onto the shoulder, and cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the screech of the motorcycle's tires as it halted behind him. Officer Thorne dismounted, his movements sharp and practiced. He was young, with a military-style haircut and the kind of rigid posture that suggested a deep-seated need for control. His sunglasses masked his eyes, but his clenched jaw told a story of its own. He saw a luxury car with diplomatic plates he didn't recognize and therefore distrusted, and a black man behind the wheel. In his mind, the equation was simple. Something was out of place. Something needed to be put back in its place. He didn't approach the passenger side. He walked directly to the driver's door, his hand resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. Kalen watched him approach, a familiar weariness settling in his bones. He'd seen this act before, on different continents in different uniforms, the swagger of a small man given a taste of power. "License and registration," Thorne said, his voice flat, devoid of any courtesy. Kalen reached into his jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. He handed over his diplomatic identification card and the vehicle's official registration. Thorne took them with 2 fingers, holding the documents as if they were contaminated. He glanced at the ID, his lips twisting into a faint smirk. "Kalen Adebayo," he read aloud, mispronouncing the name with a pointed carelessness. "That's a mouthful. You from around here?" "I reside in San Francisco, officer," Kalen replied, his voice a calm, deep baritone that offered a stark contrast to the officer's clipped tones. "I am the sitting ambassador. May I ask why you've pulled me over?" Thorne ignored the question. He tapped the diplomatic plates with his knuckle. "These plates. We don't see many of these down this way." "What kind of diplomat are you exactly?" The condescension was a palpable thing, thick and suffocating. Kalen had negotiated trade deals worth billions, mediated conflicts between warring factions, and dined with heads of state. He was not accustomed to being spoken to like a common criminal. Yet he remained composed. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. "I represent a sovereign nation, an ally of the United States," Kalen said evenly. "The vehicle is registered to my country's embassy. It has full diplomatic immunity, as do I." Thorne let out a short, humorless laugh. "Immunity? That's a good one. Everybody's got an excuse." He leaned in closer, his shadow falling over Kalen. "I clocked you doing 15 over the limit back there." It was a blatant lie. Kalen's car had a state-of-the-art tracking system that logged its speed, a security measure insisted upon by his own government. He knew his exact speed, down to the decimal point. "With all due respect, officer, that is incorrect," Kalen stated, his voice firm but still respectful. "I was driving at the posted speed limit." "Are you calling me a liar?" Thorne's voice sharpened, the pretense of procedure falling away to reveal the raw aggression beneath. "I am stating a fact," Kalen replied. This was the moment the interaction pivoted. For Thorne, it was no longer about a traffic violation, real or imagined. It was about dominance. It was about the refusal of the man in the car to shrink, to show fear, to offer the deference Thorne felt his uniform demanded. "I've heard enough," Thorne snapped. "Step out of the vehicle." Kalen's hands, which had been resting on the steering wheel, tightened slightly. This was a line that should not be crossed. A diplomatic vehicle is considered foreign soil. Forcing an accredited ambassador out of one without cause was not just a breach of protocol. It was a potential international incident. "Officer," Kalen said, his voice dropping, taking on the quiet weight of command he used in high-stakes negotiations. "I must advise you that this action would be a serious violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. I would urge you to reconsider." Thorne's face flushed with anger. He wasn't used to being lectured, especially not by someone he had already judged and dismissed. "I don't give a damn about Vienna. This is my highway and my rules. I said get out of the car now." Kalen took a deep breath. He thought of his wife, of his children back home. He thought of the decades of work, of building bridges, of fostering respect between his nation and this one. And he thought of how quickly it could all be undone by one man's petty tyranny on a sun-drenched highway. He did not move. He simply looked at Officer Thorne, his gaze steady, and said, "No." The word, quiet and absolute, hung in the air like a declaration of war. Officer Thorne was momentarily stunned into silence. He had expected compliance, or at least fearful pleading. He had not expected this calm, immovable refusal. The man's composure was an insult, a direct challenge to his authority. Thorne's training, his instincts, everything in his narrow worldview told him to escalate, to reassert control, to break this man's infuriating calm. "That's it," Thorne snarled, reaching for the door handle. "You're obstructing. You're under arrest." He yanked the car door open. Kalen did not resist, but his eyes followed Thorne's every move, his expression one of profound disappointment. This was no longer just an abuse of power. It was a willful act of diplomatic vandalism. As Thorne reached inside to grab his arm, Kalen spoke again, his voice devoid of heat but heavy with consequence. "Officer, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Before you proceed, I want you to get on your radio and contact your supervisor. Ask him to verify my status with the State Department. My name is Kalen Adebayo. Do it now. It is in your best interest." Thorne hesitated, his hand hovering inches from Kalen's arm. The name, the title, the sheer, unshakable confidence in the man's voice. It was enough to plant a seed of doubt, a tiny, nagging voice that whispered he might be stepping into something deeper than he understood. But his pride was a powerful beast. Backing down now in his mind was a sign of weakness. "I don't need to call anyone," he spat, his bravado returning. "You're not in charge here. I am." He grabbed Kalen's arm. The moment his fingers closed around the fine wool of the ambassador's suit jacket, a line was crossed. It was a point of no return. Kalen did not flinch. He did not struggle. He simply turned his head and looked directly into Thorne's face, his eyes holding a mixture of pity and resolve. "You have just made a very grave error, son." The word son cut through Thorne's anger like a shard of ice. It wasn't a term of endearment. It was a dismissal. It was the way a king might address a court jester. Just as Thorne was about to haul him from the car, Kalen's hand moved, not to resist, but to his dashboard. He pressed a small, discreet button. A silent security alert, transmitting his location and a live audio feed directly to the embassy's security chief and, simultaneously, to a high-priority desk at the U.S. State Department. It was a protocol for dire emergencies, kidnappings, terror threats. It had never been used for a traffic stop. In San Francisco, a secure phone line buzzed to life. In Washington, D.C., alarms blared in a soundproof room. On the Pacific Coast Highway, Officer Thorne was oblivious, caught up in his own small drama, unaware that he had just become the lead actor in an international incident. He pulled Kalen from the car, forcing his hands behind his back. The ambassador stood tall, his posture regal even as the cold metal of handcuffs was being prepared. He looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore, indifferent to the small, ugly scene unfolding on the cliff's edge. He had done all he could to de-escalate. He had warned the officer. Now, the gears of a much larger machine were beginning to turn, and Officer Thorne was about to be crushed by them. Thorne was enjoying himself. He had the man out of the car, hands behind his back, the satisfying rasp of the handcuffs tightening around his wrists. He pushed Kalen against the side of the sedan, the sun glinting off the polished black paint. This was how it was supposed to be. Order restored. Authority respected. "Now," Thorne said, his voice laced with triumph, "we're going to have a talk about respecting law enforcement." But the talk never happened. A crackle came from the radio on his motorcycle. It was dispatch. The voice was calm, routine. "Unit 7 Adam 12, what's your 20? Thorne reached for his radio, annoyed at the interruption. "On the PCH mile marker 42, code 6. He was making a traffic stop. There was a pause. Then the dispatcher's voice came back, no longer calm. There was a new edge to it, a nervous energy. "7 Adam 12, be advised. We're getting a priority call from stand by." Thorne frowned. "Priority call? Out here?" He glanced at Kalen, who was standing silently, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The man's composure was starting to feel less like arrogance and more like patience. The radio crackled again, this time with a different voice. It wasn't the dispatcher. It was his direct supervisor, Sergeant Matthews, and his tone was one of barely suppressed panic. "Thorne, what the hell are you doing?" Thorne straightened up, his smugness evaporating like morning mist. "Sarge, I'm on a stop. Uncooperative individual, possible DUI." "Uncooperative?" Matthews' voice was a strained yell. "Son, do you have any idea who you just put in cuffs?" The seed of doubt that had been planted earlier began to sprout, its roots wrapping cold around Thorne's gut. He's some guy claiming to be a diplomat, Sarge. Refused to exit the vehicle. He's not claiming anything, you moron. He is an ambassador. The State Department just lit up my phone. The actual State Department. They say you're in violation of about a dozen federal and international laws. They're talking about a kidnapping charge, Thorne. A federal kidnapping charge. Thorne's blood ran cold. He looked at the man he had just arrested. The calm face. The expensive suit. The quiet, unwavering dignity. It all started to crash down on him. The diplomatic plates weren't fake. The man wasn't lying. He had, in his quest to assert his authority over a black man in a nice car, stepped on a diplomatic landmine. Sarge, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Matthews roared. Because you never listen. You just push. I've had 3 complaints about your conduct this month alone. Now, take those cuffs off him. Take them off him right now. And you treat him with the respect you would show the President of the United States, you hear me? The captain is on his way. The chief is on his way. Hell, from the sounds of it, the damn National Guard is on its way. You are in a world of trouble. The line went dead. Thorne stood there, the radio silent, the sound of the waves suddenly deafening. He turned slowly to face Ambassador Adebayo. The man's expression hadn't changed. He was still just waiting. Thorne's hands trembled as he fumbled for the handcuff key. His face, which had been flushed with anger, was now pale with terror. He unlocked the cuffs, the metal falling away from the ambassador's wrists. "Sir," Thorne began, his voice a hoarse whisper, "there has been a terrible misunderstanding." Ambassador Adebayo slowly brought his hands around, rubbing his wrists. He did not look at Thorne. He looked up the highway. In the distance, the faint, unmistakable sound of multiple sirens was growing louder, a chorus of consequence racing toward them. "No, officer," the ambassador said, his voice quiet but carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "There has been no misunderstanding at all. You understood exactly what you wanted to do. You just misunderstood who you were doing it to." Within 10 minutes, the tranquil stretch of highway had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. 2 black Suburbans with government plates screeched to a halt, and men in dark suits, agents from the Diplomatic Security Service, emerged, their faces grim, their movements efficient. They immediately surrounded Ambassador Adebayo, one draping a jacket over his shoulders, another speaking quietly into an earpiece. The local police chief arrived, his face ashen, followed by Sergeant Matthews, who looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Officer Thorne stood alone, isolated, the architect of his own demise. He was no longer a figure of authority, he was a liability, an embarrassment being cordoned off. The chief walked over to him, his eyes blazing with a fury that was cold and absolute. "You are suspended, effective immediately," the chief said, his voice low and guttural. "Give me your badge and your weapon. You'll be escorted back to the station. Don't speak to anyone. Don't even breathe too loudly." Thorne, numb with shock, unclipped his badge, the piece of metal that had defined his identity, and handed it over. It felt weightless in the chief's hand. He felt weightless. Ambassador Adebayo, now flanked by his security detail, walked over to the chief. He was no longer just Kalen. He was His Excellency once more. His demeanor was formal, his voice carrying the full weight of his office. "Chief," he said, his tone measured, I appreciate your swift response. However, this incident cannot be resolved with a simple suspension. This was not a procedural error. This was an act of targeted harassment, a violation of international treaty and an insult to my country. The chief nodded, his expression pained. I understand completely, Mr. Ambassador. We will cooperate fully with the State Department's investigation. Whatever you need, it's yours. Kalen's gaze drifted past the chief and landed on Thorne for a brief, final moment. He saw not a monster, but a small, frightened man, stripped of his power, drowning in the consequences of his own prejudice. There was no triumph in Kalen's heart, only a profound sadness. What happens to him is a matter for your department, Kalen said, turning back to the chief. My concern is ensuring this does not happen again to anyone. My office will be in contact. With that, he was ushered into one of the waiting Suburbans. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud. The convoy pulled away, leaving Officer Thorne standing on the side of the road, surrounded by the wreckage of his career. The fallout was swift and severe. The story, despite the State Department's best efforts to keep it quiet, leaked to the press. Diplomatic incident on PCH, ambassador arrested, screamed the headlines. Officer Thorne was fired. His department faced a federal investigation and a scathing review of its training protocols and history of complaints. The diplomatic relationship between the U.S. and the ambassador's nation was strained, requiring weeks of high-level apologies and assurances to repair. A month later, Ambassador Adebayo stood before a group of young, aspiring diplomats at a university lecture. He spoke of the nuances of foreign policy, the importance of cultural understanding, and the delicate art of negotiation. At the end, a student raised her hand. Mr. Ambassador, she asked, with all the high-stakes conflicts you've dealt with, what has been the most challenging moment of your career? A faint, knowing smile touched Kalen's lips. He didn't mention the wars or the trade disputes. He paused, letting the memory of the sun, the sea, and the siren settle in his mind. The greatest challenge, he said, his voice resonating through the auditorium, is not convincing a foreign power to disarm. It is convincing a man with a little bit of power that you are, in fact, human. He let the words hang in the air. True authority is not the power to command. It is the wisdom to respect. Never forget that.